Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to our conversation. My name is Elīna Lange-Ionatamišvili. I am the senior expert at NATO Strategic Communications Center of Excellence in Riga, Latvia. And today, here with me, I have András Rácz, who is a senior research fellow at the German Council on Foreign Affairs.
Thank you.
Actually, we are sitting in the very same chairs, in the very same venue as we were about 5 years ago when we had our first conversation about hybrid threats and security. So in these 5 years, I think so many things have changed. We have seen two US presidents. Both of them have had quite different approach to international relations and to how they frame the threat to the United States and to NATO. We have also seen UK leaving the European Union. We have seen Russia finishing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and at this very moment we have Germany negotiating who is going to be their next chancellor. NATO has issued its 2030 reports, and also NATO has pulled out of Afghanistan, and Taliban is now back in charge of the country. So many things that impact our security. I don't really know where to start, but I'll probably start by asking you, after these 5 years, since we last spoke, do you, as a European, do you feel more secure or less secure? Do you think European security has advanced, or?
If one tries to give a short answer to this question, and I'm not sure that a short answer is fully accurate, but in case we try to give a short answer, my answer is a definite yes. 5 years ago, when we spoke here about hybrid threats, about the threats posed by Russia's possible aggression against the Baltic states, and about the ongoing aggression against Ukraine, the picture was much darker. We did not know a lot of things back then what we do know now. We understand the nature of hybrid threats much better. We also know a lot more about how to counter these threats, let it be active countermeasures or improving our own resilience. Plus, regarding this particular region, right now, with NATO's enhanced forward presence here, with the 3 battalions in the 3 Baltic states and the 4th battalion in Poland, this massively reduced the danger of Russia's aggression. So all in all, yes, I do feel more secure, but this is of course only a comparative perspective. As from the same old threats that we have spoken about 5 years ago, yes, from those threats, we are more secure. But there are other threats emerging. Let it be the geopolitical ambitions of China, let it be the instability in Afghanistan, about which 5 years ago there was no need to talk. I mean, there was a lasting international presence in Afghanistan. The situation looked not good, but stable enough. And see, here we are with the country turned completely upside down. So from the old threats, I feel more secure, but I think we need to keep an eye on the new ones. Let them be anthropogenic, so human-made threats, or originating from the technological sector. Plus, one more thing, climate change. Something we just cannot avoid, something we cannot ignore, something we can't afford not to talk about and not to tackle. So, more secure I feel from the old threats, but about the new ones, we need to keep an eye on them.
Yeah, and I guess some of them are those same old threats just evolving by the help of technology, just becoming more present. And I think we also see this in the NATO's 2030 report. The language focuses a lot on threats that are multiplying, coming from all possible directions. So, yeah, I would agree that this feeling of general uncertainty, what lies ahead, is still very much present. During these past 2 years, we have seen here in our region interesting and actually quite alarming developments in the context of hybrid threats. For example, in March last year, we saw Russia setting up a vaccination center on the border close to Estonia, and inviting Estonian citizens to come over and get vaccinated with the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik V vaccine. That was, of course, accompanied by targeted messaging towards the Russian-speaking audiences in Estonia. And also simultaneously, there were reports about Russian intelligence services running an international disinformation campaign to undermine the Pfizer vaccine. So all of these things happening at the same time. Another example, in September last year, Lukashenko decided to retaliate for political decisions of Latvia, Lithuania and Poland by pushing migrants across our borders. And this has now, well, actually not now, but very quickly it evolved from a border control problem to actually an international image problem for our countries because we had to keep justifying why are we not taking these migrants in. So these are two examples how our security is targeted in very different ways, quite unconventional ways. And in this context, do you think that these type of threats, these type of attacks, if you can call them that this will become a new normal for NATO countries? And if yes, then what should we change in how we view and understand security to be better equipped to tackle these kind of threats?
My short answer is yes, absolutely yes. So these type of threats are not going to go away. Our adversaries are quite skilled and motivated, of course, that's why they are adversaries, right? Motivated to use our own vulnerabilities against us. The good news in the story, I think, that the threats you enumerated and the number of other threats are in the non-military domain, which one could interpret also that militarily we are much safer than we were, let's say, 5 years ago. Yes, in the non-military domain, there are plenty of ugly things happening and a lot more is to come. I mean, regarding the Sputnik itself, that's a very interesting story from the very beginning, because it shows also how integrated the Russian approach towards using various tools and means is. I mean, they develop a vaccine, they support the recognition of that vaccine with information means, pretty much targeted to the Russian-speaking audience in Estonia, and they support the whole thing with intelligence operations conducted in the West, plus a lot of business deals about the export of the Sputnik vaccine. And at the same time, when we look back, and when we look at how successful Russia is with its Sputnik vaccine, you remember when the pandemic started, Russia launched this medical aid mission to Italy. Russian military aircrafts delivering healthcare equipment, disinfection equipment, vehicles, a lot of medicines and supplies. And back then, we looked at it at what a genius Russian operation that is, and see Russians are again ahead of us. Looking back, we know that most of the equipment was useless. Now we know it pretty clear that the whole thing was just a cover-up for intelligence operation, and the medical supplies Russia has been promoting, and what you mentioned, the Sputnik vaccine Russia has been promoting, it's far from being a Wunderwaffe. It's far from being some kind of a wonder weapon. Regarding the Sputnik, Russia itself is in a unique dependence, and Russia maneuvered itself into this unique dependence, because there is a political dependence on the Sputnik vaccine, right? Because President Putin endorsed the Sputnik vaccine already August 2020 and basically called that, yes, Russia is going to use the Sputnik V. There is also a production line dependence, and for months Russia just did not have enough vaccines simply because the decision was there, but the production lines were not fit for producing such a number of vaccines needed. There is also a dependence or a vulnerability consisting of the Russian population's unwillingness to take the vaccine. Russians are practically unable to even go close to the 50% vaccination rate because the Russian population does not trust the Russian vaccine. There is data, Levada Center has data on the trust in the vaccines. And data shows that in Russia there has always been a mistrust towards vaccinations. But people trust the Russian-made vaccine a lot less than they trust vaccines in general, which leads us to the fourth vulnerability. Because of the political decision and because of all the, all the hype around the Sputnik vaccine, Russia seems to be unable to import Western vaccines. Yes, and their own population doesn't trust their own vaccines, But importing Western vaccines looks like politically not feasible. And at this point, we are watching the tragic mortality rate inside Russia. So yes, 1.5 years ago, we were wondering how genius the Russian operation was and how much they are ahead of us in handling the pandemic. Where are we right now? Who is handling the pandemic better? So I would just encourage everybody to be patient and just wait for the longer results. This is a funny example, comparing Russia's role and place 1.5 years ago and right now in October 2021. We are not faring that bad.
Strategic patience,
Yep.
yes. But unfortunately, what we also see is that, for example, in Latvia, where we are right now, we see quite high numbers of people who want to be vaccinated specifically with Sputnik vaccine and not any other vaccine. So from that, we can conclude that this, let's say, information influence operation has succeeded to a certain level. But perhaps that is also linked to some form of relationship that the population here has with government in Russia, meaning that they don't actually live in Russia and then they don't experience Russia in the way that the local Russians do. And this brings me to my very, I would say, unscientific conclusion or observation. But it seems to me that what we see in Europe is that the high vaccination rates are closely linked to high trust in governments, in government institutions, and also in media. So which is not the case here, unfortunately. And I'm just thinking that probably this is also the case that the Russian people in Russia trust the Russian government also less, not just the vaccine itself, than maybe those who are happy to take the Sputnik vaccine here. But in this context, I wanted to ask you, would you also take this vaccination rate as some kind of a sign of how resilient society is, that it's able to tell true information from false information, has this trust in government agencies, and is able to actually take a collective decision and get vaccinated in order to make everybody safe and to overcome a crisis? Would you take that as a sign of resilience against also other potential threats?
Of course, yes. Science works. Natural science works. The Western-made vaccines work pretty well. We have really large data sets about the functioning of these vaccines in the United States, in the UK, in many, many Western countries. Yes, of course, in the field of information warfare, one of the tricks the adversary often plays is the false generalization. Yes, every vaccine has side effects, very minimal. But yes, in a case 1 of a million, things go wrong, somebody might get seriously ill or die. 1 in a million, really low chances. But still, the adversary might try to exaggerate these individual unfortunate cases into a general narrative about the failure of Russia, of Western vaccines. This is something it's possible to counter if the society trusts the government and if the society trusts science in general. And just as you said, this is a well-established connection, the trust in public institutions, trust in science, trust in mainstream media. It directly increases the resilience to a number of threats, not only information threats, but in this particular case, health-related threats. The same goes also for financial threats. A population that doesn't trust its government, that is not trusting mainstream media, is much more vulnerable even to criminality and to the wildest conspiracy theories. And when it comes to the Sputnik vaccine, I honestly hope that Sputnik vaccine will get the authorization from the European Medicines Agency, because that would be an important relief for many people in Estonia and Latvia who want to get the Sputnik vaccine, for many Hungarians who already got the Sputnik vaccine. Technologically, or the vaccine seems to be a good one. The problem is with the production lines. As we are sitting here right now in October 2021, the reason why the Sputnik vaccine did not get yet the authorization from the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, is not the technology of the vaccine itself, but the production lines, because the quality is volatile. I honestly hope Russia will be able to fix that and will be able to help its own population as well as other parts of the world to supply them with a well-functioning vaccine. This is, I think, a mutual interest. But as long as we are not there, as long as the authorization from the European Medicines Agency is not there, the people who exclusively want to get a Russian-made vaccine but can't get it because of the lack of authorization will remain vulnerable to the virus. So again, just to reiterate my answer to your original question, yes, I think there is a direct correlation between trust in government, trust in science, trust in mainstream media, and resilience to a high number of threats.
But isn't it so that the younger generation, not that we are not young, I mean, we are, of course.
Of course we are.
Those who are even younger than us, their social media consumption and dependence, let's say on social media, where they get their news and try to understand what's going on in the world, what is important, what is not. So it's much higher. And many of these young people report that they actually don't watch television any longer or read newspapers or do anything of the sort. They just scroll Facebook or YouTube or Instagram and whatever comes up. If it's an interesting story, they will read it. And what seems to be happening is that if you and I would normally go to a source, to a brand. So, for example, if you hear that something's going on, where do you cross-check? You automatically just go onto BBC or CNN or, you know, your local mainstream newspapers page and just have a look. Are they writing about it? Are they not? But what the young people are doing, it seems, they are looking for a story and they are not necessarily paying attention who is providing this story. It doesn't matter. So, and the way they form their conclusion is by pulling together these different stories on the same topic, and then, you know, kind of the best story wins. Because also sociological research shows that they can't often even name the sources. They just say, well, it's Facebook, but who on Facebook, you know? Doesn't actually have such importance to them anymore. And I think this also contributes to this erosion of trust into established institutions, into established media brands. They don't actually influence the conversation in the younger generation anymore.
Are we deemed to remain passive? Do we have to remain passive about that? I'm not sure. There is a lot of room for improvement in improving media literacy among also people who are younger than us, because we are also young, of course. We could teach people. We could include it into the school curriculum, like some European countries already do. Media literacy, media awareness. So to let people know that, yes, it's important to look up not only the news itself, but the source of the news. But this is something one doesn't have to invent the wheel. This is something common. Knowledge is a question of education. It's a question of decision whether we include this into the school curricula, whether we invest into this in the educational side, first. Second, most of the technological platforms, social media platforms, all young generations are using are in our own hands. These are Western technological platforms. There are ways to have a negotiation, let's say, with Facebook, that perhaps they should step up more efficiently against fake news. So there is a solution on the regulatory side. And the third thing, we could, I mean, if our adversaries are investing money into advertising fake news, cannot we invest money into advertising our own narratives? Are we banned from that? Or even if states are banned from that, are we sure that there are no other channels to push our own narratives? Why do we let only the adversaries to spread their narratives in paid advertisements? So I see a lot of improvements here, and particularly when it comes to the next generation of fake news, technogenic threats, if you like. The next one that is already coming and will be present in a few years, and in a few years I'm pretty sure we will all be talking about them, is deepfakes. Deepfakes, so such video contents which are manipulated to such an extent that they look absolutely real, and there is no way yet to quickly distinguish between a deepfake from reality. And just imagine, let's say in a Baltic setup, any of the leading Baltic politicians deepfaked into saying something aggressive or nationalistic against the Russian-speaking minorities. Imagine the destabilization potential of that. Or any politician in France, in Germany, in Sweden, or in any other countries where there might be tensions inside the society. Imagine deepfakes aimed at igniting these tensions. Yes. How do we defend ourselves against? Deepfakes, particularly if are supported by well-planned information operations, they may have an almost immediate effect. It's not like a long-lasting narrative, a fake news narrative that might affect the society in the long run. A deepfake might result in immediate explosion of tensions. So our reaction time will be much slower, meaning awareness alone is not going to help.
Yes.
Technology will be the solution, or hopefully will be the solution to this technology-imposed threat. So when it comes to the wider scale of disinformation or the wider scope of disinformation, what I'm most afraid is not the classic ways of disinformation. About that, we learned a lot. 5 years ago, when we were last time talking, we did not know as much as we do now, right now. But the future is already coming, and the future is the deepfakes. We need to think about it.
Yeah, definitely, I agree. And I think this is what we see, that people are now well aware and well used to disinformation being spread online, by written word or by doctored pictures. But deepfakes is something that they are not used to yet. So it's much easier to trick people. I think they are potentially more trusting towards this type of content, which is kind of video plus audio. And purely from a human perspective, eyes and ears, if we can't trust them, then what can we trust? So this is very advanced manipulation. Luckily, of course, there are people who are working on different types of software that is able to detect and recognize deepfakes. But unfortunately, it seems that for the moment, the sort of good guys are still a step or two behind the bad guys. So these technologies to create deepfakes are improving much faster than the ones to recognize them. It's kind of more of a reactive approach. But this brings me to one example that I found quite shocking. In South Korea, for example, they are using digital humans for commercial purposes, for advertising, which means that it is digitally created human, man or woman, looks perfectly as a real person, and they advertise cars or some other products. And there was a case of a digital human named Rosie, who was put on Instagram platform. And as the developer of Rosie said, for the first 3 months, Rosie's followers did not realize that she is not a real person. And I found that very scary. And commercial advertising is one thing, but of course such digital humans could be used for all sorts of malicious purposes, for manipulation, for influence. And I think another point about it is that you can't really take them out. You can't put them into prison or bring them to court, or just in a very kinetic way eliminate them. They just can spring back from any other server where this program is being stored. I found it quite shocking for myself. I don't know. What do you think about this?
I strongly believe in technological development. And originally I'm a historian. If you look back 200 years, how did our ancestors live? From the technological perspective, from the health perspective, from how convenient their everyday life was and how convenient our life is, the development is just breathtaking. And with the development of technology, is just getting faster and faster. I mean, we who are of course young, we remember the pre-internet era. For example, my students don't, because they lived all their lives in the internet era, all their kind of conscious lives in the internet era. And this type of development makes us more efficient in combating diseases. Just look at the vaccines. In communication, in better organizing our cities, in countering tackling climate change, hopefully. So I'm a strong believer in technology. And of course, throughout human history, there have always been cases when technology developed for good purposes has been misused. But this shall not be an argument for just abandoning the given technology. Artificial persons, these types of softwares, are conceptually not much different from an advanced virus. It's a computer software, and if it's a computer software, it's possible to counter it. And yes, virtual person, a digital person, one cannot lock up in a prison, cannot kinetically take out, cannot take to court. But for example, the developer can be reached.
Provided that you know who it is.
This is what requires a technological solution.
And this is what brings me to my next question to you. I think that a lot of the time when we are faced with these hybrid threats, and a lot of the time specifically in cyberspace, but not only, one of the main problems that the target state has is actually how to communicate about it. Because in essence, hybrid threat is a threat where you can't really tell the origin. So it is always designed in such a way that there is always plausible denial, or you can't really attribute it. And then the question is, okay, we understand as a country we are under attack. It's happening. But how do we talk about it to our population or to our political partners internationally? And I think, yes, specifically these technological cases, they are always very difficult to attribute. I mean, look at Russia, you know, the cyber attacks against Estonia, 2007, Georgia, 2008, United States election, you know, the list goes on. And they have always held this sometimes very narrow, but still margin of plausible denial. They say, well, you know, where's the proof? I mean, this is not proof. This is just some investigative journalists making up things, or, you know, yes, maybe you detected this trace, you know, but it doesn't mean that it was orchestrated from the Kremlin. Yes, it was maybe some criminal doing it in Russia.
Sure.
We don't know.
And we adopt the sanctions.
Yeah. So
we adopt the sanctions nevertheless. Mm-hmm. So plausible deniability works only to the extent as long as we are looking for the other side to admit that, yeah, we know what. I am the one who committed the crimes. I recognize and I admit that I'm the one who committed. They would never do that. We shall not seek the other side to admit, let's say, a cyber attack. We do our attribution and we take our countermeasures regardless of what the official communication of the other side is. This is classic deterrence by punishment. And yes, they will keep denying their involvement also because from their own domestic logic, it's hard to admit that we did something wrong and we even got caught about it. Of course, they would never admit. Mm-hmm. But we shall not seek to make them admit. What would it change? We need to go for the countermeasures, and if our attribution is credible enough. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. Some of my colleagues are. I know it's a complicated task, but I also know that in most cases it's not impossible. So if once we can attribute, we can take the countermeasures, either sanctioning the individuals or the companies or the states behind these groups. And if the states don't admit their guilt, it doesn't change much.
Yeah, I think this very famous Skripal poisoning case was a good example where Britain just called Russia out, even though at that point in time probably there wasn't sufficient investigation or evidence, but at that point they still took the decision to call Russia out, and we saw how all the allies joined Britain and imposed the sanctions against Russia.
And we inflicted massive damage on Russia's intelligence capabilities by expelling around 150 Russian intelligence operatives throughout of Europe.
That's right.
This is deterrence by denial. Sorry, this deterrence by punishment, sorry. So yes, the other side did something, and then the other side had to face the consequences. This doesn't mean that Russia would never again do it.
That's right, we have to be prepared. And we will talk about it hopefully sooner than in another 5 years' time.
Yep.
Maybe next year at the next Riga Conference. So thank you very much for the conversation. I hope our viewers enjoyed it, and see you next time at the Riga Conference.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you.